Forex Reserve. This is an important topic of Forex Reserve, which the RBI holds, and you need to know what all is included in the Forex Reserve because यहाँ से सवाल आता रहता है. Forex Reserve में आप सबको पता है there are some things that RBI holds. It is held by RBI, Foreign Exchange Reserve. The Foreign Exchange Reserve is important. Why is it important? To maintain the currency. जैसे कि मैंने आपको कहा, when the demand is high, RBI will supply its own dollars. RBI, how will RBI supply its own dollars? RBI does not print dollar. RBI maintains dollar. RBI stores dollar in its foreign exchange reserve. So Forex Reserve, we need to have the Forex Reserve, a huge Forex Reserve in India. But India का जो Forex Reserve है, it is not an earned reserve. It is a borrowed reserve. It is a borrowed reserve because close to अगर आपका foreign reserve is let's say $500 billion, our external debt is close to $550 billion. तो हमारा जितना भी reserve है, that is actually a borrowed reserve. India has a borrowed reserve. India has a borrowed reserve. We don't have an earned reserve because the amount of money that we have in the Forex, almost the same amount of money we owe to the foreign countries. तो अगर आपके पास you have the Forex of $500 billion, we owe this $500 billion to another country. So this is how India has a borrowed reserve. Now, India borrowed reserve होने के बावजूद, what are the various things that we have in this reserve of India? Number one is a foreign currency. The foreign currency. Foreign currency, precisely the hard currencies. Let's say we have the US dollars. Dollar है हमारे पास. We have the euro. We have the British pound. We have the British pound. We have the Japanese yen. We have the Chinese renminbi. These are your hard currencies of the world, 5 hard currencies of the world. And generally countries जब forex maintain करती है, these are the currencies that they maintain. इसके अलावा they have deposits in various, RBI has forex deposits in various other countries as well. उनके central banks में उनके deposits होते हैं. We have already covered that when we covered the quasi, other deposits with RBI. These other countries have deposits with RBI. Likewise, RBI has deposits with other countries as well. So वो भी RBI की एक foreign currency होती है जो RBI ने बाहर भी deposit कर रखी होती है. So that is again part of the Forex Reserve. Number 2, RBI has, it is Chinese renminbi. Chinese yuan जो होता है, yuan is also called renminbi. Second is your gold reserve. Second is your gold reserve. RBI के पास gold reserve भी है अपने. That is again part of the Forex Reserve. Gold reserve. Then we have number 3, SDR. And then we have RTP. SDR and RTP. In this lecture, there is nothing that we have to study about the foreign currency and the gold reserve because there is nothing special regarding it. We have to cover the SDRs and the RTPs. Subheading SDR. SDR is your special drawing rights. Special drawing rights. These special drawing rights, what are these? Well, first thing that you should be very clear of is that these SDRs are not the currency of the IMF. ये currency नहीं है. These are your rights. ये rights. ये currency नहीं. This is just, when we created the International Monetary Fund after the Bretton Woods Agreement, हमने IMF जब create किया, how did we create this IMF? This is an international monetary fund. ये fund है. और fund में आपने पैसे दिए होते हैं. Each country of the world, each member countries have given money to IMF to be created, this fund to be created. Every country has provided some money. So that is a fund. That becomes a fund. So how much has the money been generated? That has to have a unit. Well, we don't measure it. We don't have a unit of dollars in which we measure how much fund has been generated. We measure it in terms of SDR. तो हमारे पास कितना SDR आया है? हमारे पास IMF के पास कितना SDR है? We don't say that IMF के पास इतने dollars है. We say IMF के पास इतने SDRs है. So what is an SDR? It is a unit. It is a unit created by IMF to actually denote the money, the fund that has been generated in the IMF. So it is a unit. of IMF. It is a unit of IMF. तो ये यूनिट कब क्रिएट किया गया? इट वाज क्रिएटेड बाय IMF in 1969. और उस वक्त this unit, when it was created, one SDR used to be equal to $1. एक SDR किसके बराबर हुआ करता था उन दिनों? $1 के बराबर. That means how much dollar has been generated? We considered it to be one SDR. और इन दिनों $1 used to be 0.88 grams of pure gold. Grams of pure gold. So that used to be SDRs, special drawing rights. Special drawing rights. So initially it was only and only denoted in terms of dollars. But later on we added a lot of currencies into it because हमें पता चला कि dollar is now not the only currency in the world that is acceptable to the largely by the people. So there are some other currencies. Later on we added a basket of currencies in the SDR. Basket of currencies in the SDR. So initially we used to have 4 currencies. कौन-कौन सी? We used to have US dollar. We used to have euro. We used to have Japanese yen. We used to have pound sterling. Pound sterling. These are the 4 currencies that were included in SDR initially. Later on, one more currency was added, and that is Chinese renminbi. Chinese renminbi. ये Chinese renminbi कब ऐड हुआ? 2015 में, 2015 में. So later on, after the Chinese economy, exploded, that was the time when Chinese renminbi was included in the SDRs of IMF. So currently there are 5 currencies in SDR. तो SDR के अंदर असल में यही 5 currencies होती है. Now there was a question in 2016 UPSC that the question was like, which are the currencies that are included in the SDR? So the option was, which is the latest to be added? The option was Chinese renminbi. तो वहां पर आपको एक टिक मारनी थी. बहुत आसान सवाल था अगले 2016 के UPSC में. Now there are 5 currencies in the SDR. अब ये है क्या असल में? Now let me give you an example. We created an IMF, right? International Monetary Fund. Now that it is an international organization. अब IMF में it has a member country. It has a lot of member countries. तो इसमें एक member country है, suppose Pakistan. There's a member country US. There's a member country India. Now these member countries, they have some quota at the IMF. Based on that quota, they'll have the voting right. They have the voting right. So India का कुछ quota होगा. India has its own quota at IMF. Quota कैसे determine होता है? On the basis of the money that you have given to the fund. जितना आपने उसमें इन्वेस्ट किया है. यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स का सबसे बड़ा कोटा है आईएमएफ के अंदर. So United States has a huge quota at IMF. Pakistan will also have a quota at IMF. Every member countries will have a quota at the IMF. Based on that quota, you'll have your voting rights. You'll have your voting rights. So voting rights उसी quota के हिसाब से होते हैं. Voting rights. And based on that quota, you will also get your SDR allocation. SDR allocation. So some SDR will be allocated to you. Some SDR will be allocated to US and some SDR will be allocated to India. तो इंडिया को इतना allocate हुआ है, अमेरिका को इतना allocate हुआ, पाकिस्तान को इतना allocate हुआ. So that these are your SDR allocations. These are your SDR allocations. SDR allocations. Whenever SDR is being allocated to a country, that country has to pay interest to the IMF on that allocation. SDR allocation के ऊपर country has to pay interest to IMF. Country has to pay interest. Country has to pay interest. Based on what you have has been allocated to you, you'll have to pay interest. कि मुझे इतना allocate हुआ, मैं interest दे रहा हूँ. Okay? But then there is that is why SDR is also known as an interest bearing unit of IMF. It is also known as an interest bearing unit of IMF. Why? Because the countries have to pay interest on it. Whenever they take the SDR, they'll have to pay interest on it. So based on the member quota, member का कितना quota है, they'll get the SDR allocation and they'll have to pay interest on it. And that quota is revised. SDR allocation is revised every 5 years. So every 5 years, our IMF will decide that whether or not we'll have to increase the SDR allocation or decrease it. It is revised every 5 years. Now, let's say an example. IMF has allocated $100 billion of SDR, 100 billion SDRs to, let's say, to India. अब इंडिया को SDR allocate हुआ है. So India's SDR allocation is how much? India's SDR allocation is 100 billion. 100 billion. That is the allocation of SDRs for India. India has to pay interest on it. India has to pay interest on this allocation. But this allocation, when it reaches you, we can say that you are holding these SDRs. When it reaches you, we can say that India is holding these SDRs. These are known as SDR holdings. These are known as SDR holdings. तो एक तो हो गया आपको allocate कितना हुआ है. That allocation is based on the quota. That allocation is based on the quota that you have at the IMF. तो quota के हिसाब से you are allocated this much. Then आपने hold कितना किया उसमें से. A country can sell the SDRs. Country को 100 billion allocate हुआ है. Country ने बेच दिया अपने 100 billion में से. Let's say country is only holding 60 billion. Country is only holding 60 billion. It has sold the remaining 40 billion. Sold it. Country can do it. So when the country sells and buys SDR holding can increase or decrease. SDR holding can increase or decrease depending on the country's use of it. Country कैसे उसको increase कर रही है या decrease कर रही है. Holding बढ़ भी सकता है, कम भी हो सकता है. SDR allocation remains the same. SDR allocation remains the same for the 5 years. आपको जितना allocate हुआ है, then it has been allocated. Then you can earn some SDRs from other countries. You can purchase some SDR. Let's say India has an SDR allocation of 100 billion, but India wants more. India purchased some from Sri Lanka. India purchased some from Afghanistan. India purchased some from Pakistan. India now has an SDR holding of $150 billion. तो 150 billion की holding है. Allocation सिर्फ 100 का है. So holding can either go up or come down. Depends on the country's use of it. Country कैसे इस्तेमाल कर रही है. Is the country increasing it or is the country decreasing it? Now, when you are getting the SDR allocation, you have to pay interest on it. And when you are holding the SDR, you get interest on it. You receive interest on it. ये याद रखना. So SDR allocation पे you have to pay an interest. SDR holding पे you receive an interest. You receive an interest. So in the beginning, SDR allocation is exactly equal to SDR holding. In the beginning, SDR allocation is exactly equal to SDR holding. तो allocate अगर 100 हुआ है, आप hold भी 100 कर रहे हो. That would mean the interest that you're paying is exactly equal to that interest that you're receiving from IMF. तो ये आपका दोनों कट हो जाता है. You're not receiving anything, net के हिसाब से. But later on, slowly and gradually, countries' holdings might increase. If countries' holdings might increase, can get higher interest payments. Their SDR holding बढ़ गई और allocation कम है. Now, country can also decrease its holding. When the country is decreasing the holding, the country has to pay a lot of interest and receive less amount of it. So, ये change होता रहता है. Fine, depending on the SDR holding, आपने बढ़ाया है या कम किया है. Is it clear?